Aw. Aw, Glenn Scott.
Well, remember, you'll have to unmute.
I hopefully have gotten unmuted now and hopefully have pictures of Glenn and Eric Scott in front of you.
Yes and yes.
Very good. Well, then, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, friends, family, extended family, and people who continue to come, or for some cases, are just beginning to come to the Book of Mormon Perspectives Forum. I thank you for your participation. And this evening, I think you'll be thankful for having participated as well. I did blunder this evening because I had an email from Jan Martin inquiring if she was still presenting, and I had not done a good job of communicating. And so hopefully we'll have her next week, although I've not been able to get that confirmed. And if not, I will be substituting. But we'll try to get her here because she has the story of Samuel the Lamanite in such a way that I'm confident that all of you that are people who have read and appreciate the Book of Mormon will appreciate the insight into that remarkable prophet. But for tonight, we get to hear from Eric Scott. And because the Scots were so kind that when Teperotu Rina Faura first came to the United States, her sister dropped her off at the Scots house without knowing the Scots had not been warned that here a young lady from Tahiti was going to be coming to stay with them. And it proved to be just a bit of a clumsy experience because, because here's three Scott boys, and here comes a young lady that came from Tahiti and didn't speak very good English and was just now getting a cultural immersion. But the Scott family generously took her in, helped her get some clothing, and got her preparations for going to Graceland. And it happens that Eric's mother, Bunny, was the cousin to my mother, Enid. And so, since we are family and they took care of my sweetheart, and then I got 53 years to take care of her, we have some common bonds that are reaching beyond the Book of Mormon. However, the fact that we have the shared bond of the Book of Mormon is reason to celebrate this evening. And I wanted to highlight that Glenn Scott, who is Eric's father, didn't go to KU to get his PhD until I think it was after retirement. And I was working on my master's while he was working on his PhD. And we had some fun conversations, and it was just neat to see this old guy digging in as a student and participating so effectively in a specialty that the academic faculty were not necessarily that fond of. But he made friends and he was able to have a profound influence. And as a result of that, he wrote Voices from the Dead, New Light on an Ancient American Record. And Eric gave us a presentation on that a while back. And I wanted him to come back and share his own perspective because he has been leading a Sunday afternoon Book of Mormon class on roundtable at the Stone Church in Independence. And while he's presented some of his father's findings, he hasn't had a chance to present to you his own findings. And so this evening, that is what I think will be the priority. Of course, he has latitude to talk about most anything he wants to. I would invite you to remember the people that we have in our extended two-dimensional family that are in need of prayers. And I'm sure that list goes well beyond what I'm going to share with you, but Bill Shepard, we just got the news from Blair Bryant that he had a fall this last week, and while he's back with us, I'm confident that his prayerful support for him would be welcome. We have had several of our members who have lost family members, and to be able to remember them is appropriate because we're dealing with the Book of Mormon, whose theme is the Promised Land, and because So many refugees in our world are looking for that promised land. And we are currently in a governmental crisis in which people looking for the promised land are being kicked out of the Americas, or the United States anyway. And because we are struggling with just how open are we as a society to the foreigners and the strangers, that issue is one I think that we need to pray about. So I lay it before you. But let us pray together. Awesome enigma of the universe, to whom we look for guidance in our quest for the promised land. You have touched our lives with enlightenment, like when the Jaredite stones were touched by your hand. To cross the deep and darkness, no, you have provided us the light of your Son to fulfill a plan of enlightenment, an eternal promise to everyone. And yet we struggle in our sonder, wondering at the outcomes as on our journey we face strife. Daily, needing guidance, nudges toward the goal of eternal life. For our world faces daily dilemma, conflict, hate, and war. Enough that we seek safety in our traditions, some of which keep us spiritually poor. Yet you assure us that your hand is stretched out still to guide our quest when we offer our best, our integrity and goodwill. This evening, we ask for your Spirit to bless our presenter, Eric Scott, and our participants to explore together, to embrace your Spirit as you have taught. That we ask, that we seek, that we knock, looking for the truth, to pass on as our journey's legacy to the next generation, our youth. That they appreciate your guidance, your touch, the gentle nudging of your hand to help them fulfill the intellecti of the eternal promised land. We pray in the name of the Christ, whose hand nudges us every day toward the arc of history's sacred hoop. And in this, in every land, we pray. Amen. All right, Brother Scott, I will stop sharing and the floor becomes yours. Ladies and gentlemen, I anticipate that he will want to present and then take questions, but Eric, if you'd like to open that, otherwise you're welcome to.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll go ahead and proceed. Actually, Paul, I want to make a couple of corrections. Dad went back to school after he retired and he got his bachelor's degree, not his PhD.
Oh.
And of course, we were very proud of him to go back after retiring and get his degree. And then also, the name of his book is Voices from the Dust, not Voices from the Dead.
Oh, I like the Voices from the Dead.
Well, it fits better with Isaiah if you use Voices from the Dust.
Okay, I agree with that. My apologies. And thank you for the corrections.
Okay.
Oh.
I'm going to be holding up some pictures, so I'll put them up right next to my camera when I get to that point. I want to read some correspondence, which will, I think, introduce my topic. I wrote this letter to Dave Brown. Dave's made presentations to you before. And here we go. And he and I have talked about a lot of things together. So let me read what I wrote to him and then his response, because it gets right into my topic of two cities of Nephi. Dave, I'm working on identifying the city of Nephi. I have a question that I would ask my father if he were still here. Hopefully you can help. What causes so many scholars to assume that Kumenauhuyu is the city of Nephi? My father claimed that most scholars agree to that, but what proof have they And what string of events do they have to believe that? Chincoteague seems to fit the geographic descriptions to be the city of Nephi better than Kumenauhuyu, except that it's twice as far from the assumed landings of the Nephites, but it's closer to the city of Yashalan or Zarahemla. In any case, the city of Nephi is many days from their assumed landing. However, it is closer to Yashalan, 21 days if we go back to Mosiah. Anyway, my question is, what causes so many scholars to assume Kumenauhuyu is the city of Nephi? And so I'm going to read you Dave's response, and then I'll go on to my thoughts on the matter. I believe there are two cities in Nephi, and you'll see that Dave agrees with me as well. My father always insisted that Kumenauhuyu was the only city in Nephi, and he and I had constant disagreements on that subject. Finally, I said, rather than try and prove that it's not, why don't you see if you can find in the Book of Mormon scriptures that would allow for it to be the city of Nephi? And he said, well, he would give that some thought. And I don't know how much thought he gave to it before he died, which, by the way, was a year ago last Friday. Anyway, let me read to you what Dave wrote. And then also I want to give you some pictorial examples of things that I think tend to prove that Chincoteague was a city of Nephi. Not the city of Nephi, but one of two. Very confusingly, the Lamanites had a city of Nephi, as the Nephite records it. In one location of Scripture, it is referred to as the city of Nephi, located in the land of Lehi Nephi. The description of this city and the events surrounding it place it in the Lamanite-controlled territory, and the center of all Lamanite control over commerce and surrounding kingdoms seem to come out of Kumenauhuyu. If probably most of you are familiar with this, but Kumenauhuyu is really the same site as Guatemala City. It's right on the edge of Guatemala City, so it's not actually in the city limits, but it's contiguous with Guatemala City. Dave writes, why do we have two cities named the city of Nephi? Because both are true. The Nephites had a city of Nephi in their land, and the Lamanites had the city of Lehi Nephi. However, there may be an issue with chronology, much like the Egyptian cities of Avaris and Ramesses. The writers in the Hebrew record were recording the location of the ancient city where Joseph and his family lived, Avaris. But when this record was being written 250 to 400 years later, the city of Ramesses had been built over the top of it. The Bible gives us the name that was contemporary with the original author, Ramesses. I believe the name is happening, the same as happening with Kumenauhuyu. The original city was either the city of Lehi or the city of Laman. But with the conversion of the king over all the Lamanites, they changed their names and identity. The successor son became King Anti-Nephi Lehi. Therefore, they changed their ruling in the city of the Lamanites to identify it as their true spiritual heritage. In other words, they went from being the city of Lehi Nephi to the city of Nephi. So when Mormon was writing his abridgment, he was using the name of a city that reflected the conversion of the Lamanite kingdom and the golden age when all the cities had become unified as believers in Christ, Jesus. He was using the contemporary name for the ruling city of the Lamanite kingdom when he recorded their history. So I'm going to maintain that there are, in fact, two cities in Nephi, one being the city of Kumenauhuyu, which would please my father, and the second one being the city of Chincoteague, which I believe has more archaeological support than Kumenauhuyu does. The city of Chincoteague was, I believe, the city that Nephi ultimately ended up in after he left his original landing site. And ultimately, when Mosiah left there, we find in Mosiah 1176 that it took a total of 21 days to get from the city of Nephi to Zarahemla. I'm going to hold up a picture now. Hopefully you can see this of the current photograph of the location of the city of Chincoteague. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Can you see?
It appears between two bodies of water.
Good. If you can see those two bodies of water, they're separated by a land bridge. Now, I'm going to show you a drawing of how that works out. Let's see if I can do this right. Okay. You'll note in this drawing,
Looks like a pelvis.
give me a moment. I'll get it here. In the center of the drawing, you'll see at the bottom, it's actually a stairway. The bottom circle is a hill that exists. There's a stairway that goes up the front of that hill, and at the top of the hill is a rectangular object, which is a temple. Behind the temple, you'll see what is a land bridge that connects that hill then with the cliffs that are behind it. On either side of the land bridge are lagoons, which are about 200 feet below the top of the land bridge. Try this again. The cliffs are actually slightly curved, and the hill that's in front of the cliffs blocks off a view of the land bridge. So let me describe it, and then we'll go on from there. Initially, there were cliffs with cliffs that were about 200 feet straight up and down. In front of the cliffs, or at the bottom of the cliffs, was a river. The river began to cause the cliffs to fall away. And they happened to fall away in one particular spot where, as the cliffs fell away, they dumped a big hill out in front of the cliffs. Then between that hill, or actually as that hill was joining the cliffs, the river that the hill fell on top of began to erode away the connection, so that all that was left was a land bridge between the hill and the cliffs. Like I say, the cliffs are about 200 feet high, and the hill that's in front of the cliffs is about 150 feet high. And at the top of that hill is a temple, and there's a big stairway that leads from the city of Chincoteague up to the top of that temple. If you stand in front of that temple, you're not able to see the land bridge because of the curve of the hill. You have to walk around the edge of the hill to be able to see that there's a land bridge. So if any place that you stand in the city, you're unable to see that land bridge. So it's only visible, actually, when you get to the top of the hill and go behind the temple. Voila, there's a bridge that connects the hill to the cliffs on the other side. So down below that land bridge, on either side of it, are two lakes, and they're about 150 feet immediately below the bridge. That bridge was the secret pass that the people of Lemhi used to be able to escape the Lamanites who had captured their city. The city of Chincoteague, I believe, initially was where Nephi went before he left, and Messiah then took over. And as you know, Messiah left and then went down to Zarahemla. Once in Zarahemla, the Zenith wanted to go back and see if Chincoteague was still there, and he did. And then Alma was converted at the same time of King Zenith, whose son was King Noah. Actually, that's when Alma was converted. And so Alma left under persecution and formed the city of Gosh, I want to say Hammond. That's not the name of it. It starts with an H. I'm sorry. I'll come back to it in a second. Let me see if I can find it for you very quickly. Helam. And then he left from there and went to the city of Zarahemla. Later, after Zeniff had come back again and Noah had taken over, Limhi took his people across that hidden pass in back of the temple and led them down to the city of Zarahemla, which apparently, again, if you look in the third Mosiah, the 77th, it's 11th Mosiah, the 76th chapter, you'll see that it took a combination of 21 days to get from Chincoteague down to Zarahemla. So if you assume that it took people about 3 miles a day to get through the jungle with all their possessions and children, livestock, if they went 3 miles a day and it took 21 days to get there, you can see that it probably was about 60 miles. If you lay a ruler on a map, you'll see that that's further than the actual distance between Chincoteague and Zarahemla. But they had to go through jungle and up over hills and so forth. And so it was much further than just a straight line. So why do we think that Chincoteague is in fact the city of Nephi, at least one of the cities of Nephi? Well, there are 2 or 3 reasons. One is following the visitation of Jesus Christ to this continent, there was a group of Mayan or Nephites, if you will, during the Golden Age that visited each of the significant Mayan cities and wrote their history on glyphs and left those glyphs behind. Now, those glyphs didn't appear until after Jesus Christ had left. But as you can imagine, and I'll give you an example of the glyph that's at Chincoteague. There's a glyph there that shows the king leading his people across his land bridge, and it calls him the city of zero. Well, he no longer has a people. They're leaving, so he would in fact be a city of zero. Also, another glyph shows the guards sleeping at the foot of the hill that the temple's on. Those glyphs, by the way, weren't carved until about 100 years after Jesus Christ came, because you can imagine that King Limhi didn't stop while he was leading his people across the bridge and say, wait a minute, I've got to carve this glyph. But we also find that those kinds of glyphs were left at each significant Mayan city, and archaeologists acknowledge that there was a group of, I'll just simply say Mayans, that visited each of the significant Mayan cities in the same period of about 100 years after Jesus Christ, and actually were the ones who were responsible for carving the glyphs. But to make a long story short then, and then we can have discussion on it, I believe there were 2 cities in Nephi. One, the city of Nephi that Nephi founded and where he left from to go down to Zarahemla. And there are, in fact, glyphs that would acknowledge that being the city of Nephi. And then, of course, one other, it's not a proof, but it certainly is a good example of something that lends to Chincoteague being the city of Nephi, and that's the secret pass. In all of our archaeological studies so far, we've yet to find any other cities that have a secret pass that lead out of the city. Chincoteague does have one, and again, it's a land bridge, a hidden land bridge that connects the mount that the temple is built on to the cliffs behind. The land bridge is about, and I've been on it and walked across it. The land bridge, as I recall, is about 8 feet wide. It slopes down very quickly to then dropping off straight down to 150 feet to the lagoons on the bottom of it. And the length of the land bridge is probably 100 feet, maybe a little less than that. But it does, in fact, connect to the cliffs on the other side, and there's a steep incline once it gets to the other side. It goes up to the top of the cliffs and then on into the jungle where the glyphs were found. So I hope that's enough to get us started in terms of discussion and asking and answering questions. So I'll turn it over to the group. It's yours.
Thank you. Any chance, Eric, that you have a map that can show us your Chilcotin relationship to Kaminahuyu and Yaxchilan?
If you're looking, yes, I do. I have to run upstairs and get it. But I can tell you, Chincoteague is at the northwest corner of where Guatemala intersects with Mexico. So it's due west of Mexico, um, right where Guatemala connects with Mexico. Chincoteague is actually in Mexico, but it's right at the intersection of where the northwest corner of Guatemala connects with Mexico. Again, Cumanauhuyu is in fact the city of, it's Guatemala City. And Guatemala City, of course, is, as you might imagine, in Guatemala. And it's about probably 20 miles inland from the Pacific Ocean. While you're discussing, I'll see if I can't find a map for you real quickly.
Now, the geography of Mesoamerica, as related to the Book of Mormon, has had quite a lot of scholarship, and yet we have quite a lot of questions. And so here's one of the people who spent a good deal of his life studying those questions. So I'll be anxious to have him come back to the map and help us understand what his perspective is. One thing I would point out, that one of the reasons that that there's a strong tie between Kaminahuyu and the Nephites is that the talud tablero design of architecture was used very heavily at Kaminahuyu. That is to say that there's a sloping, nearly vertical face, and then a table face, and then another. It's a stair-step pyramid approach. And because the site of Kaminahuyu has effectively the same design as Teotihuacan, therefore, there have been some that have proposed that Teotihuacan was perhaps a satellite city, or some have gone the other way and said that Kaminahuyu was a satellite city of Teotihuacan. So clearly a relationship, because the architectural design is so similar. You do find step pyramids across Central America, but for example, if you go to places along the East Coast, the talud tablero design is more like a staircase rather than the platter table faces that people could stand upon. All right, he is back.
Okay, Monty has his hand raised. Did you have a question or comment, Monty?
Yes, I was going to ask a dumb question. Does Samuel the Lamanite appear in Helaman in our Book of Mormon? That would be the COC.
Yes, Samuel's in both the COC and the LDS Book of Mormon.
Is it in Helaman?
I'll look and see just a moment.
The answer is yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you have a bunch of scholars here that are nodding their heads, and so that's a pretty good indication if you look at the screen, Monty.
That would be a pretty drastic change to the Book of Mormon if you start moving around places and people, changing the story.
Mhm.
Well, I never know. I mean, I found differences between the two versions of the Book of Mormon, what we call our authorized version, and what the Mormon Church puts in print. There's enough differences that, I approach them as two different texts.
The most detailed presentation we've had on that came from Stan Troe. And if you'd like to go back on the historical recording of these events, then you can pick up some very accurate comparison off of his presentation.
No, I thought I'd just wait till about 2 o'clock in the morning and call him on the phone.
You might well answer. Okay, good. We have a map coming up. Okay. He's got
Okay,
the land of Zarahemla.
you see Zarahemla to the left of the map is another, what I've circled in pencil.
Yes.
That's where Chincoteague is. And if you can see down at the bottom,
Land of Nephi. Yes.
right above where it says land is about where the city of Guatemala is.
Right. Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you. And Yaxchilan?
Yaxchilan is in fact Zarahemla.
Why? What's your evidence?
Well, primarily the evidence is the chronological staircase that leads from the main plaza up to the top of the hill where the temple and the ruling class ruled, that has a list of all the kings that were listed in the Book of Mormon that are on that stairway. We haven't found any other archaeological evidence like that. We also know that Yaxchilan was the main economic center until Tikal surpassed it. And there's also a glyph at Zarahemla or Yaxchilan that says it's the city of Mulek. And that's one of the reasons we would think that it might be Zarahemla.
I think that's one of your strongest evidences. However, there's a great deal of Yaxchilan that would be quite a lot later.
There's also, this is sort of stretching a point, but overlooking you may or may not know, Yaxchilan exists in the center of a hook in the river. If you can imagine the river making a circular hook and coming back on itself, Yaxchilan is in the middle of that. And along the edge of the river, for some ways back, is a large central plaza. And then as you go up this, I mentioned to you this major staircase that goes up to the top. It then levels off at a bit of a plateau before it goes higher. And at that on that plateau is the evidence of a large wooden tower having been built. That doesn't prove anything, but we know King Benjamin, in fact, had built a tower that he could give his sermon from. And again, we've not found any other city that has that kind of evidence where he was able to, where somebody standing on that tower would be able to speak to thousands of people and be seen and heard at the same time. So it's just more stuff that lends to that being Zarahemla. There doesn't seem to be any evidence that it's not Zarahemla, but that's not the same thing as proving that it is.
Right. Well, you have hands up, and so let's turn it over to Deb to keep people in order.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Looks like Faye has a question and then Terry. Go ahead, please, Faye.
It's not a question, it's a comment. When I was there, there's a big stela that was laying on the ground, and it had two. It's the only place I think they've ever found that had two emblem glyphs, like the city had two different names.
Yes.
With Melek, it would have been a Jaredite name, and then the second,
Ulek.
Oh,
yes.
Ah,
that's not Jared. That's Hebrew.
Well, true. Well,
Malek means king.
no, I'm sorry. I said Jaredite. I didn't mean it. I meant it was the the Mulekites.
Yeah.
Right. I misspoke. But then it's not. I didn't talk about the name of the book being about death either.
All right.
what?
We allow mistakes here.
Okay,
Especially for me.
What?
okay, thank you, Terry.
Did somebody call for me?
Nope, Terry, go ahead. Perhaps you're muted.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Question. What are the name of the two lakes that were in that original photograph you showed? And do you consider those the eastern waters and the western waters in the Book of Mormon?
No. I consider the eastern waters and the western waters to be the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific Ocean. The two lakes that we're talking about are, I'm trying to give some, both of them are about the size of a football field. So they wouldn't
Okay, so they're
justify
not
having
mutable.
names.
All right. Thanks.
I'm not,
Okay, Rick, go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me? Because I can't, somebody
Yes.
spotlighted me and now I can't see whether I'm muted or unmuted.
You
Oh, I
are
can hear you.
unmuted and we can see you.
And you can hear me.
Yes.
And we can hear you.
Hearing is better than seeing for me.
we
We got
agree.
all of you.
Okay. Eric, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. When I read the Book of Mormon account, and the people of Mosiah are being fearful for their life, they flee the land of Nephi and the city of Nephi, and they migrate to the north or to the lowlands or wherever.
Yeah.
They end up in the city of Zarahemla.
Yes.
Okay. So years pass. We're still in the book of Mosiah. And Zeniff wants to go back to the city of Nephi,
Yes.
to the same city they used to live in.
Yes.
We can only guess at his motivation, but it's called the city of Nephi. Only it's never a hyphenated name when he's going there.
Right.
But then a few years pass, and I guess in the land in the city of Nephi, which is now a Lamanite area, controlled area, down in the land of Nephi, down in the land of Zarahemla, the people are wondering what happened to these people. So when they have talk about going back to that land where those people went to, then they start calling it Lehi-Nephi. So it's the Zarahemlaites that are calling it the hyphenated Lehi-Nephi to refer to that place that those people went so many years ago. So to me, it seems like there was a name, not really a name change, but a name addition to the same city that they left from back in Mosiah's time to escape from the Lamanites, Laman and Lemuel. And then the addition, or I guess it'd be a prefix, onto the name came later when they were discussing going back to see or to go check on those people that left. Do you have any understanding of why that name change? Because to me, the city of Nephi is the same city as Lehi Nephi later on in Mosiah. That's my question.
I understand your question. I have to think about that to give you an answer.
Okay, well, yeah, I hope you would think about it. I don't just want I don't want an easy assumption. That was the phrase that I
My
remember
father used, yes.
Glenn using. Yeah. So I don't, from the Book of Mormon, I don't see where there's two cities of Nephi, but there's one city of Nephi which is referred to later as Lehi Nephi. In the account, also in Alma, there is a city of Lehi, which I think is a completely different city.
I do too.
Okay, so that's my problem with aligning what the Book of Mormon says to what you're saying archaeologically or theoretically.
Well, the answer I have is a partial answer.
All right.
I've never been convinced that Kumanauhuyu was a city of Nephi. My father and I never could agree on that.
Yeah. Yeah, you little right. City rivalry, Book of Mormon rivalry.
And
Okay.
the reason I, if in fact there were two,
Yeah.
I think that the city that Zeniff went back to, and the city that King Limhi escaped from, and the city that Mosiah escaped from, was in fact the only city in Nephi that I'm aware of. Okay. My
Yeah.
father didn't agree with that. And so
Well, okay.
I don't have any further answer. In
Yeah.
fact,
Okay. Well, I'm thinking from my understanding of the Book of Mormon, there is only one city of Nephi, which was like what you said. Mosiah escaped from it, Zeniff returned to it, and then the search party that went after them to find out what was going on with what was it? I can't think of their names.
well, about it was it was
Was
Zeniff's
it?
people
Yeah, yeah.
that went back,
Somebody's run.
and they got lost for 40 days and wound up in the Jaredite country where they found a bunch of skeletons and swords.
Oh no, I'm not talking about the attempt to get back to Zarahemla. I'm talking about the attempt from Zarahemla people to find out what happened to those people that left, 3 generations ago or 2 generations ago, to return to the land of Nephi. What happened to those people? We haven't heard anything from them. And so at that point in the story, it's the city name is now referred to as Lehi hyphen Nephi. So that's I can only find one city with the moniker of Nephi. So okay. Thanks for your answer, Eric.
I can give you more chronology on what happened to those people that went back, but that doesn't answer your question about the name of the city.
Yeah, I think there's what you're telling me is archaeological based speculation and steles, but I'm just strictly looking at the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, this this deals with your question, but it doesn't fully answer it. The Nephites landed. The Lehites landed on the Pacific coast of Central America. The Nephites split from the Lamanites and traveled north for many days, where they finally landed in the city of Nephi. Then later, we've got Mosiah comes to power in the city of Nephi, and he's warned by God to flee, and so he flees, and he flees to Zarahemla. then his, not sons, but friends of his sons, a fellow by the name of Zeniff, wanted to go back and see if what had happened to the city of Nephi. And so Zeniff starts back, gets in a big fight with a bunch of people. They nearly wipe each other out. He comes back, starts a new group, and they finally do get it back up to the city of Nephi. There, his son Noah becomes a wicked king and takes over. And under Noah, Alma is converted as a priest and leads his people to another city. And then he flees down to Zarahemla. And then that leaves Limhi, who's a son of King Noah. And Limhi gets captured by the Lamanites. His whole city gets captured by the Lamanites. And so he then leads what's left of his people across the secret pass and on down to Zarahemla. So that kind of accounts for all the different people in the city of Nephi that I can share with you.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that doesn't answer
Thanks.
the question of the name.
Right, right. It doesn't answer that. There was two cities of Nephi. When I'm just reading strictly Book of Mormon, that the same city is they left as has a new addition to its name, maybe to, I don't know, distinguish it from some other city at that point in Mosiah. And it says they even they in Mosiah 6:11, which is LDS 9:8. It's recording what they're doing in the city of Nephi, and they're even now calling it the city of Lehi Nephi. Mosiah 6:11.
Well, all I can really say is that lends evidence to my belief that that is the city of Nephi.
Yeah. Okay. I will yield to the next person.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Terry, go ahead, please.
Okay, first of all, I don't have opinion on either one, whether it's one city or two, but to address Rick's dilemma, to me, it's very possible that the Nephi city, the Nephites afterwards knew that was in Lamanite territory. So they could have easily named their city of Nephi, Lehi Nephi, to distinguish their city from the other one. I don't know the answer to that, but to me, that's very possible.
Thank you, Terry. Okay, Paul, go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you, Terry. I think that is a point of clarification that merits consideration. I have in my hands the book that I misquoted, and I hope that's not unfair to lay, but it happens that that I think what Glenn put forward was pretty profound. I like the timing sequence that he provides because Kaminahu U fits the time frame for the Nephite crossing. I like the Talud Tablero design that you can see illustrated here because that ties so nicely with Teotihuacan, which gets its start a little bit later. And I am, well, I have not had a chance to personally visit either of the sites to get that kind of impression. So I'm very much appreciative, Eric, for your insight, and I'm intrigued by Faye's additional comment that we have two glyphs, and I'd appreciate if you could clarify on those two glyphs what evidence that offers to support your claim.
Well, both of those glyphs say that's the city of Mulek.
Well, they both say it's the city of Mulek.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, if it's the city of Mulek, that is a pretty strong case. Well, but then you're talking about Yashchilan, are you not?
Yes.
And so that doesn't make the case for a second Nephi.
No, it doesn't.
Hmm.
I
Makes
didn't know
sense
they
that
both.
being Zarahemla.
I didn't know they both said Mulek. I could read the one glyph that said Mulek, but the characters on the others, okay.
Faye, I might be mistaken. I don't read glyphs. I just understand what people tell me they say. So I've seen both of those glyphs laying on their side. And it was my understanding that both of them said Mulek, but I'm not able to argue that point.
And I'd have to dig deeper, so I haven't done that.
Well, Eric, there's to argue the point is not our intent here, but we do have people who are seriously questioning the location of Book of Mormon in Central America, and you're attempting to give us very specific evidence to support that, whereas the people who are suspicious of it, seeing two glyphs relative to Mulek would seem like rather compelling evidence if that could be verified.
Well,
And
let
yet,
me go to a different city, Paul, from Zarahemla, that would tend to be a problem for the people that think that the Book of Mormon history took place in North America. Well, the United States. Actually, Mexico is part of North America. In the city of Amanayaha, which is Tonina on the modern maps, if you take a look at it, the city of Amanayaha has glyphs with this story carved into it. And archaeologists are the ones, non-religious archaeologists are the ones who interpreted the glyphs that I'm going to give you a reference to. And so there's not a faith bias in this regard. At the city of Amanayaha, there are glyphs that state that there was a religious leader who visited that city from another city and who converted a lot of people, and that he was thrown out of town. That he, after leaving town, he came back and joined up with a prominent citizen of that city, and they converted a bunch of more people. Those people were then burnt to death in the city square. This religious leader and the person that he recruited were thrown in jail, and it actually says that lawyers came and ridiculed them and starved them and bound them until the prison walls caved in and killed the attorneys and lawyers. And by the way, they are buried there at Amanayaha, and you can actually see the lawyers' graves. And then that the religious leader and his recruit told the city that they would be totally destroyed, and they left. And as you probably know with history, a wandering Lamanite army who was actually looking for Alma happened to come across the city of Amanaha and completely destroyed every person in it. And that's evidenced by the large number of skeletons that have sword and axe marks on their skeletons. And so that story pretty well duplicates the story in the Book of Mormon regarding the city of Amanayaha. So there's I think, somewhat of proof that that particular Book of Mormon story occurred in Mexico.
Any comment, Paul?
David's hand's up.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you were finished. Go ahead, David.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Following up on Paul's question, have you read or run across the material by Dr. Olson, I think he titled The Malay Hypothesis, where he shows that something over 100 locations on the Malay Peninsula fit the Book of Mormon story far better than Mesoamerica does. And he shows that the distance between Zarahemla and the city of Nephi fit much better the story in the book, and he makes a very extensive show that the Book of Mormon's story actually occurred in the Malay Peninsula and not in the Americas at all. Have you read that?
No, I have not. I will tell you that in addition to the city of Ammonihah, there are at least 9 other cities with glyph histories that duplicate the stories that are in the Book of Mormon. I became aware of those some 10 years ago when I traveled down to Mexico with a group called the Hilcomore Expedition Team. And at each of the sites that we visited, and there were 10 of them on that particular trip, we found that at the sites there were gift shops. And the gift shops always had multicolored books and other things that you can buy at a typical gift shop. But these multicolored books were books that were translations of the on-site archaeologists who had been there. And they were still written in Mexican. The Mexican government had not approved their release outside the state of Mexico or the country of Mexico yet. And so the histories were still written in Mexican. Fortunately, we had a member of our group. You may have heard of Neil Steedy. Neil Steedy spoke Mexican. That's not the same as Spanish, but he was able to give us a translation of all 10 of those sites that we visited. And in each case, the archaeologists at those sites had translated glyphs that gave the exact story for those sites that are found in the Book of Mormon.
Okay. Each will support his own. Dr. Olson particularly hammers on things like DNA works in Malay. It doesn't work in Americas. The plants and animals that are mentioned in the Book of Mormon don't exist on the American continent, do exist in Malay. So he makes a fairly strong argument, and I was just curious if you'd read that and could give me a reaction to his. But since you haven't read it, you can't give me a fair reaction. So
Right.
I won't push you any more on it. We'll leave it.
Thank you.
Well, since we don't want this to turn into a family squabble, let me intercede to recognize that in this forum we provide opportunity for people to present their views and people to challenge them and do so amicably.
Sure.
And the fact that we have 2 different views here being presented, as long as we remain amicable, that's altogether appropriate to this Book of Mormon forum. And I thank you, Eric, for expanding upon your father's work, even if you disagree with it. And thank you, David, for expanding upon our perceptions to remind us of Dr. Olson's work, because it is fascinating to see that it may well be that the Book of Mormon has multiple applications, not necessarily just one geographical location. So that possibility strikes me as being a rather remarkable literary accomplishment and something that also merits being studied.
Yeah, in my case, I'm simply sharing why I believe what I believe. That doesn't make it true.
Janae, are you waving? Okay, go ahead. Unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
ma'am.
Okay. Actually, Fritz had something he wants to share.
Okay.
Just as a note, we adopted our son from Honduras, who recently had his DNA tested, and along with a number of other DNA which was within that, it was in he had African and a lot of those areas over there. One of the things that caught my attention was in his DNA, it says that he was Hebrew. He had Hebrew DNA, and he is also Mayan. I just toss that out for what it's worth. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Okay, Monty, go ahead, please.
Yeah, he has you You caught me off guard. I had to wake back up. Uh, I really don't feel like the argument is all that important because I rely heavily on the spiritual testimony of the book rather than the geographical proofs. I'm not much of an apologetics person anyway, but I just think that there's a certain criteria you have to apply when you're considering a book for scriptural background. And the Book of Mormon meets it for me. And once I decided that, the rest is all just conjecture.
Monty, I must object to having opposite, different viewpoints expressed being an argument. Because
Well,
arguments tend to be very negative, and we're trying to avoid that here, but we do want to hear as many different viewpoints as possible.
I am always as objectionable as I can get.
Bobby.
Well, thank you, Monty. Even though David objects to your objections, we all we all can wave at each other and be friends.
Yeah,
I would-
anybody with the last name DeBart, I suspect, right from the beginning for being against me.
Okay.
Rick, what you got?
That's because of long association.
When I think of the word argument, yeah, sometimes it sounds like a bad thing, but when you go to court and the prosecutor presents his argument and the defense presents their argument, that either proves the innocent or guilt or to the jury. So I don't see the word argument as bad per se.
Thank you, Rick. That is a very valid definition of argument. Thank you.
Now, if one person says is two and the other one says is not, and then you say is two, is not, like 4 or 5 year, 10-year-olds, Now that's a fruitless argument. All right.
Thanks, Rick. Okay, Blair, what you got?
Well, I want to say hi to Eric.
Hi, Blair.
I enjoyed your presentation. There was a lot of banning of the name Messiah around as we were going through that discussion about the cities, and I'm not particularly concerned about the cities. As far as I'm concerned, I think Neil Steedy was on with the location of the city of Nephi, where Limhi came from. But I think we sometimes forget that there were two Messiahs.
Yeah.
King Messiah the first was the king of the Nephite line, a direct descendant of Nephi, and he would be, his story would have been lost in that 116-page loss of the manuscript. Because what we have in the Book of Mormon is Nephi's small plates for the first books up to Omni. It's only from Omni that we know about Messiah 1.
Right.
Messiah 2 was 2 generations later with King Benjamin in the middle. So we've got a real gap from Nephi clear up to King Benjamin before we get into the story that Mormon was writing. Mormon was writing the story of the Nephites from his perspective from the time of Nephi up to the end, and we've lost that with that 116 pages. We have a little knowledge about Messiah 1 from the Book of Omni. We don't know anything about King Benjamin from Omni. Suddenly, when Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith continued the story that they had written the first 116 pages on, they picked up where they had left off at the end of those 116 pages and continued on with that large plates of Nephi condensation that Mormon did. So we have a period of time in there that things are really mixed up, and we have difficult time tracing from one section to another because of that difference. Now, to me, it doesn't make any difference which is the land of Nephi, but I liked what Neil Steedy found. What was it, Chincoteague or
Chincoteague?
Chincoteague, okay. I happen to like Neil Steedy's explanation of that, and you mentioned it. It's a land in the midst of a river that looks like it goes all the way around the city, and the narrow neck at the top, the escape route at the top, is hidden. So I like that. But thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Blair. Anybody else?
Yeah, Eric, if you would, please, I recognize you came to us to talk about the city of Nephi. And I find it interesting that we've had presentations on the land of Nephi in Peru, in Guatemala, in Georgia, Malay Peninsula, in Chesapeake Bay area, and in Joseph Smith's Head. And every presentation with the evidences to support or has offered us a chance to give consideration. And I don't think anyone has been wholly convinced to move their thinking very far, but at least we're getting interesting vantage points, which suggest there is a certain universality in the book that I particularly like. And I have been intrigued when we have asked the various presenters what they perceive as the real message of the Book of Mormon, that there's pretty good uniformity, that it is the teachings of the Christ to learn to be people of peace. I personally like the statement from Hebrews 5, behold, the resurrection of Christ redeemeth mankind, even all mankind, and bringeth them back into the presence of the Lord. That idea of bringing us back in the presence of the Lord and helping us to understand that the message of the promised land in the Book of Mormon is a message to all mankind. And for that reason, that's one of the reasons I like hosting this, because I do believe that we have fundamentally a message for all mankind, and we may have arguments over the geographical preferences, but ultimately, I think when you look at that message of being the message of the Christ to all mankind, it supersedes our arguments. I would like to ask you if you would like to duck this question, you may. But if I recall correctly, your dad positioned the Olmec as Jaredite, and perceived the Jaredites as having crossed Asia and the Pacific.
Yes.
What do you think of that by this time in your own research?
Well, I've not found anything that that disagrees with that.
Well, Blair Bryant gave us a presentation to support it, a couple of presentations to support it, with several towns called Xi'an in China that would appear to have been a Chinese rendition of Zion. And the idea that there would have been people dropping off of the Jaredite migration to build, to settle where they were. And those towns of Xi'an tend to match the date pattern. And so there, you at least have some support in this forum for the theory your father was putting forward.
One of the things which I noticed that you might find interesting, the Mayans didn't use the wheel. They had use of the wheel. They didn't choose to use it in terms of transportation. They used it in terms of pulleys. They used it in terms of toys, but they didn't use it in terms of transportation. So consequently, all of their loads were limited to 125 pounds, which was as much as a human could carry on his back. And so if you look at the Mayan architecture and look at their pyramids and so forth, the stones that make up their pyramids are 125 pounds. The Olmecs, and I don't know whether they had wheels or not, I have no evidence one way or the other, but the Olmecs used much larger stones. And I can tell you, as an example, at the city of Chincoteague, there are numerous temples built there with Mayan style, but also on that same site are some temples built with a totally different architecture and made out of huge stones. I'm talking about stones as big as cars.
Yes.
And I just thought that was interesting. That's one of the ways that I can tell Olmec from Mayan construction. And then one other thing I might mention, our pastor brought this up in Sunday school class, which I thought was worth mentioning. The Book of Mormon presents Christ in the form of God. He comes down out of heaven. He is a divine creature. He's able to do all kinds of things. Whereas the Bible presents Jesus Christ in the form of a man and how he was able to minister in the form of a human. And that gives us really two different perspectives on Jesus Christ. They're totally complementary of one another, so they're not the least bit contradictory. But isn't it interesting that the two different scriptures give us two different versions of Christ, which are in fact complementary and very useful to us?
And with that, you have about 500 references to the Christ in the Book of Mormon, the vast majority of which predate his life. And that again, there you have him being born of Mary, which is not specified, I believe, otherwise. And to be able to see that the Book of Mormon is adding significantly to our body of information about the Christ. And yes, he appears as divine, and yet the prophecies about him as a man are sprinkled throughout the book.
Well, it coincides with what the Bible says. That's why we need both sets of scriptures.
Okay, floor is open, ladies and gentlemen. I have more questions and comments.
One of the things that I enjoy every Monday night when we log in is seeing what Carol is going to give us for her background painting. And unfortunately, those have always been pretty small, but since I'm spotlighting tonight,
wow,
we can see what Carol has done for us tonight.
Well, but that e pluribus unum is backwards.
That's the way it is on the nickel.
A very fancy buffalo. He's got a very nice hairdo.
All right.
He was sold almost before he was dry.
All right.
Isn't
Well,
that picture a mirror? You have to have a mirror to read that.
Well, maybe you're seeing it backwards, but I see
Yeah,
it forward.
it's backwards. But what would you say? Backwards, upside down, and wrong side out. Wrong side out, maybe. Maybe wrong side out's better.
Only with the magic of mirrors.
Yeah, right.
It was tough to do because it was so small. I had a nickel and I drew from the nickel.
You did a very good
Oh,
job.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
yeah, and I've never seen the nickel putting the bison there in color. I think that's pretty neat.
Yeah.
I added that.
So
How
Carol,
big is that picture?
The painting was about a 30 by 30. It was pretty big. It went to a coin collector. First
Wow.
art show he saw it, he bought it. A banker. It was a banker, but it was also a coin collector.
Yeah.
So
It's
somewhere it's on some big bank. I don't know where.
it's amazing.
Very well done.
Thank you.
I have a question, Carol. Can you like get your face in the center of the screen? Okay. Now raise your right hand.
It's gonna get me in trouble.
No, to us it's your left hand.
Oh, that's my right hand.
Yeah.
But to us, it's your left.
It's on your
Okay.
left.
That's
Yeah.
And it is turned around for you.
Yeah.
There's a box in there on your computer somewhere where you can change that.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay. Well, it's not important. I just wondered why it was backwards to us, but straight for her when she sees herself.
I
'Cause
think
when I
we turn
raise-
them around.
When I raise
turned
my
it
left
around.
hand, this is my left hand, and it shows up on my left side of my screen.
It's mirroring. Mirroring. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
And so that brings us back to two cities of Nephi mirroring each other.
Good one, Paul.
Thank you, Carol. I appreciate your beautiful artwork before us each night, and it is an enhancement to the whole program.
Get to travel much, Carol?
But if a banker bought it, why are we looking? How are we looking at it,
Photograph.
Carol?
I took a picture of it before he bought it.
And that's just a little picture.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
It
just
looks a lot bigger from my point of view.
Well, the original was again 30 by 30, so it
Yes.
was big. And the
So
one
how
I
big
had
is-
on the one I had on last week was the other side, the Indian side. So,
Yeah.
and I did some research to it too. He wound up in the fry pan. This buffalo was cooked after his picture was taken for the sculptor to sculpt the coin from. And
That's
the
what-
Indian's name was Irontail. If you look it up, it's pretty interesting where it came from.
Carol, I was gonna say, my husband and I love to go through, it's called the Terry Bison Ranch. So they have them roaming out where you can take an old train out and they give you like these big alfalfa pellets and they come up and you can feed them from there. But the whole herd, a lot of times the babies and the bulls, and they do sell the meat, but it is a kind of a beautiful place to see them roaming out.
What state is that in?
Wyoming. The Terry Bison Ranch is close to
On the corner of the state.
Yeah.
See your face. I see your nose.
I'm not too far. My daughter's not too far from Custer Park in South Dakota.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of influence that comes from the place she's living.
Every year,
Beautiful.
South Dakota has a buffalo roundup, and they bring herds of buffalo in that probably number close to 1,000.
It sounds a lot more exciting than it really is. It's just like a bunch of cows running, so it's not too exciting, but there's a lot of detail there.
We were introduced when we went out on the train out into the other states. You cross 3 states right there, and
On that ranch.
on that ranch. But anyway, and one of the bulls was in Dances with Wolves. You want to be a little smaller, back up. You know where the Indian boy gets off on the ground and the buffalo charges him. That's in the picture, that's all. They called him Gene.
I understood that buffalo was quite fond of Oreos too. That's why he was running.
I heard on the radio today that the Pawnee are finally this year expecting to start their first buffalo herd, and they're very excited about getting buffalo ranches. I think they have 300 acres in Oklahoma that will be turned over to the buffalo. But for them, again, for so many of the First Nations people, because the buffalo got so scarce a century ago, down to 100 or less, and for them to now have rebounded to the point that there's a couple 100,000 of them,
Buffalo, back up a little bit.
makes it very, very
There you go.
gratifying that they're rebounding to the point that most of the tribes are able to get them. Especially,
I went to a powwow this weekend and they were serving buffalo chili on the Miami reservation in Oklahoma.
yeah. Yes, I find the bison meat to be quite appetizing, and there's been good studies of its medicinal value, its therapeutic and health value, and it's very, very good for people with high cholesterol and numerous other ailments. So, yeah, there's a place for every creature in God's creation, and sometimes we learn too late. Consider all of the species that we've wiped out. We learn too late to appreciate them.
Eric Scott,
Yes.
are you going to say hi to me? You said hi to Blair. Ron Edwards.
I see your name, Ron. I don't remember you looking like that.
Well, your hair has gotten a lot lighter and more silver when the last time we were talking together.
Last time I was in St. Joe, I missed you. You weren't where I was.
Well, the last time you spoke, you got away too quick, and I didn't get to say hi to you then.
My youngest son had lunch with one of your sons about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I heard about that.
He was trying to put together a ski trip. It didn't seem to work out.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's good to see you. It's good to have you this evening.
Since you mentioned it, hello, Ron.
So, Eric, I had the chance to give my summation of why we're focused on the Book of Mormon. I need to give you that chance. And I'm confident that you'll say it differently than what I did, but probably some commonalities between it. So what do you see as the central message of the Book of Mormon?
I think the central message of the Book of Mormon is Jesus Christ. That all the Book of Mormon people were well aware of his coming thousands of years before he came. They were aware of what his ministry was going to consist of. They were aware of how he was going to die, who his mother was, where he was going to be born. And then, of course, when he actually appeared, he backed up and supported the scriptures that we find in the Bible, giving evidence to them as well as the Book of Mormon. But I think the entire message of the Book of Mormon is the divinity of Jesus Christ.
You got applause. And David, you presented an alternative view there from Dr. Olson. How would you state the central message?
I guess I'm already unmuted. No, I totally agree with both what you and Eric have said. Central message deals with Jesus Christ, second witness of Jesus Christ.
Jeannie, did you want to add something?
Carol has her hand up.
Oh, Carol, go ahead.
No, add to what I was just saying, from what you said, adding on to what you said, Paul, the idea of other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, ends up, I think, including the whole world.
I agree. Thank you.
Carol, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Eric, in his opinion, reading the Book of Mormon, there are no horses in America when it was discovered. Yet in the Book of Mormon, there are horses. And there is one part, I believe it's in 4th Nephi, that Jesus said he would cut off the horses from the midst of you. I'm wondering what your reaction is to that. Is that what happened to the horses? As far as I can read from reading history, it could have been an epidemic that killed them, but all of a sudden they all disappeared. Whereas they grew up in America, they evolved in America, in Arizona, in a jungle-like area. But there were no horses when Christopher Columbus landed. If you read the history books, what does the Book of Mormon say about the horses?
Two totally different questions there for me, Carol. One is, if you put the Book of Mormon in the Malay Peninsula, there are horses and there's no problem whatsoever. The question of what happened to the horses that evolved on the American continent is another question, and whether they ever totally disappeared or not is, I think, still a question. So why did the get it, Spanish not find more horses when they got here? I can't answer that question. But as far as the Book of Mormon, if you really want the Book of Mormon to have horses, you can put it on the Malay Peninsula and it works very well.
All right. Interesting.
Actually, there is evidence of a small pony type horse in great numbers in the United States area when Columbus got here. Columbus didn't get into the United States, so he didn't see them. But as a matter of fact, there is evidence of horses being on this continent. And of course, the Book of Mormon speaks about horses being hooked up to chariots, and Ammon feeding the herd of horses that got him in with good graces with the king. My father always felt that horses were in very small number. There weren't enough of them to make a great use of them, and that owning a horse was a real sign of wealth because there weren't that many horses around.
There's also the problem, if you will, the question of elephants that are mentioned, which occur in Malay but not in the United States. There's the question of silk, which definitely was not in the United States or in
yes, it was.
America, but is in.
Oh, yes, it is. I can prove that.
Not well. Okay, I'll have to hear your proof.
Okay.
But
there's lots
silk,
of evidence of silk and wheat here on this continent.
well, it's possible, but where's the evidence?
Well, it's in the museums.
China was very, very strong on not allowing silk outside their country. They kept a very tight rein on the outside their area anyway. They kept a very tight rein on the silkworm, and so having silk anywhere other than in that Far East area historically has not been shown.
It's in museums in Louisiana and in Texas also, where there are samples of silk and silkworms. Also wheat, barley, tobacco, a lot of things which we're beginning to find out. Also smelt furnaces, which showed a lot of scientific use of iron and steel. Many things which, when the original Book of Mormon came out, people laughed at and said didn't exist, but as a matter of fact do exist, and there's proof of it.
Well, that's fine. Each to, I guess, in a sense, each to its own. The concern I have is so many people in the community of Christ have discarded the Book of Mormon basically because of the questions that people come. Well, you can do this. You can do it this way. You can do it this way. But the strong evidence is just not there for the Book of Mormon in the American continent.
Well, you and I will have to disagree on that.
That's okay.
Phil, you had your hand up.
My tribe talks about the Ice Age. They'll get a load of that, and how they followed it from the southern and moved northern, and it moved up into not too far from us, maybe 100 miles, and up past Mount Shasta, and the Indian people came into that area. The Norumuk went to, which I am. And then it had an ice dams there that made Tule Lake, if you look at it, and out through Tule Lake you'll find small fossil horses, and also mammoth was here. We have mammoth fossils here.
Denver does.
And Denver does, all through all those different things. But when it comes down to it, I found was really intrigued about the stories that were held down, were told about moving northward. And they followed the glaciers. And when the glaciers broke up in the mountains up high, it went down the Sacramento Valley, all the way down the California Valley, and flooded and killed a lot of the Indians living in the valley.
I've heard a story so
And
many
that happened,
times
and that happened 3 times where the
in the history.
glacier dams broke. But so yes, there's lots of things that we migrated, and I could see that happening in the Book of Mormon too. Migrations, and so migrating with the territory, and our weathers were not the same neither. Everything was quite a bit different, and so they migrated with those too. And the Aztecs we have them every now and then come up and dance at some of our ceremonies and different things. And the Aztecs, which were in the Mexico area, and they really have quite a dance dress for regalia. And but the thing is those I'm looking at the tribes that basically kind of came in with some of the land that you guys were talking about, where the Mexico Gulf was, and into the towards the Horn, going there. And so all through there, it's kind of shifted through the years. And of course, you guys are archaeologists. You had to know a lot of this stuff. We followed the changes. They all changed. Everything changed. So yes, we had horses right here in this area, but they weren't very big. They were like little dogs. I heard somebody say that. They weren't very big at all, and they have actually fossils of them. And if you go up towards Alturas and heading towards Idaho, you run right into places where they're found in the plains and all that. So it's kind of interesting. But involvement, I can see migration. I can see all that coming across, and others came at different times. They didn't all come at once. And on water, and some came on ice, and some came on because of the glaciers. And so movement was a whole lot different than just what we think about the groups that came later and came across on water and built their ships, their barges, or maybe even the one that they talk about in it with carried the Lahona, I guess you would say, and kind of interesting.
Thank you, Phil. Rick, you got a comment, question?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
Eric.
Eric?
Yeah.
Eric.
Rick's got a question.
Well, hopefully I have an answer.
Well, all I want to ask is, Carol asked you a question about horses, and I'd like to propose a answer for Carol's question, even though it wasn't directed to me. Would it be okay if I gave a possible explanation?
Well, sure.
Okay. Is it okay with you, Carol?
You bet.
Okay. If you look at that Book of Mormon passage that you referred to in third Nephi 9,
I believe it's 4th Nephi 101, I think. I
Well,
can look
then,
it up, but my book's way over there.
Well, you referred to, I will destroy the horses out of the midst of thee.
And throw the chariots down. So we're not
Right.
talking about
Well,
really small animals here.
Right. So
The horse was a war machine.
Right. The passage that I'm looking at is 3 Nephi 9, verses 101, verse 101.
Yeah.
And it says almost the same as what you're paraphrasing. I will cut off thy horses out of the midst of thee, and I will destroy thy chariots.
Yes.
Okay. If you read the context of that chapter around those verses, it's the prophecy to the Gentiles for the end times. So it's not only says he's going to cut off the horses and the chariots, he's going to cut off the witchcrafts and the soothsayers and the graven images and groves and so forth. So false worship is going to be stopped. So another way to look at this is the horses and the chariots. I mean, if they said, I'm going to destroy your BMWs and your Audis, we wouldn't, he couldn't use those words, or vehicles or cars and trucks. And so maybe this is symbolic because of the limitations to what they could talk about, what they could write about. But the prophecy is to the Gentiles in the future.
Yeah.
We have spent 2 centuries scrambling around trying to find proof for the Book of Mormon. And some cases we've done a pretty decent job. Other cases, our proofs have been proven to be embarrassments to us. But we're still scrambling around trying to find proof for the Book of Mormon in the American continent. And simply, Dr. Olson said, if you put it in the Malay Peninsula, you don't have to scramble. It's all there.
David, when you presented on the Malay hypothesis, it doesn't make sense, because when Joseph Smith found the Book of Mormon in Hill Cumorah, he was told that he would be among those people that were descendants of the Nephites.
That Joseph Smith was to be among the descendants?
Yes, that he would be, that the Book of Mormon would come forth among the descendants of the Nephites, the descendants of the house of Jacob. So if the Book of Mormon came forth in the United States, how can the descendants of Nephi be in the Malay Peninsula?
I don't know what historical record you're referring to, so I can't really further that one. I know that Joseph Smith definitely believes that the Native Americans were descendants of the Lamanites. Now, whether he had any revelation to that, or whether the assumption was there because Hill Cumorah is in the United States, is a different question. My first real qualms about Malay Peninsula was, how do you handle the Hill Cumorah from the Malay Peninsula? And then found that people from the Malay Peninsula settled on islands east of Africa about 400 AD. They named their capital city Moroni, and the Atlantic current goes from there to the east coast of the United States. And so going by boat, which has been proven from that area, you could go very easily to Hill Cumorah and bury the plates.
Right. But when they found the plates, the Book of Mormon says that they would be found among the people that would benefit from receiving the translation of the plates. And it would be a story of their parents, their
Wait
fathers.
a minute, Rick. Wait a minute, Rick. Give me that quote from the Book of Mormon.
Well, I'm trying to find it word for word.
Please.
But Joseph
Now
Smith
realize also, Gentiles are not just on the American continent. The Chinese are Gentiles.
But I'm talking about who the Book of Mormon was given to and who the Book of Mormon talks about when it refers to Gentiles.
Oh,
the Book of Mormon doesn't refer to the Chinese as Gentiles, although you may. The Book
it
of
doesn't
Mormon
refer
refers
to.
to the
It doesn't mention
Gentiles
doesn't mention Europeans either.
As those people coming across the waters from their mother Gentiles. Okay. Well, I don't want to take Eric's time or Carol's time, or but if you want to debate this, I'd be willing to give you my email so that we could share evidence or proof or whatever and get to the bottom of it, because every week you're sharing this Malay hypothesis.
No, not every week. I've only shared it a few times.
Well,
because I realize it's a real pain in our sides when we have for 2 centuries believed the Book of Mormon's been on the American continent for anybody to suggest it somewhere else. And so I have been reluctant to mention it.
Okay, I'm going to send you my email if you want to send me some evidence. If you want to engage in a conversation, we'll go it that way.
I really don't. I'll just refer you to Dr. Olson's book, because that's all I have done is trying to report what Dr. Olson was saying. Unfortunately, Dr. Olson's no longer with us, so we can't pin him down. I'm sorry for that.
And I would refer you to the Book of Mormon.
I've read the Book of Mormon several times, from cover to cover.
Well, it doesn't fit with the Malay hypothesis, in my opinion.
Well, and it fits as well there as it does for the American continent.
Okay, everybody. Here's my email in the chat if anybody has input on the Malay or anywhere else.
Hey, Phil, you want to get in?
Yeah, I just want to tell you something more updated, but the thing is we had at the temple when it was first built, and we had a service there, and our tribes, the Indian tribes, all of the tribes basically that were part of the church, and others that came from different places, but they were there as well. And then we had a ceremony because at the stone church, where the church was built there, I mean the auditorium just out, and all you got is the ruins that go around that thing, but there was at one time there was stones piled. Now those piles of stones were piled there, and when they built the auditorium in the 40s, they plowed into desecrated that monument. Now the thing about it, when they did that, the Osage Nation, which is from that area, got real distraught about it. And so anyway, the church invited them to the ceremony, and the chief and his people, some females as well, were standing all in a line basically. And well, after the ceremony was over, to make this short, after the ceremony was over, I contemplated on some things that were spiritually divine going on, so I decided, well, everybody else went back into the temple for the ceremonies. I went to the auditorium, and I went down the row. And pretty soon, just a short time, I was sitting down in the seat toward the pipe organ there. The chief of the Osage Nation opened the door to the auditorium and hollered out my name. He said, "I've been looking for you because I took a piece of obsidian from, it looked like Mount Shasta, a real peaked piece of obsidian. And I give it to him, and he presented it to the east, south, northwest, and all that. And then, but then he started telling me about they traded with my people. That's over 2,000 miles away. I said, how did you do that? He said, we had runners that would run back and forth. They meet them in the centers. But anyway, then he told me the story about how they were at war fighting, which the Book of Mormon talks a lot about, fighting against their own people, different people, and they were fighting, and they were walking through that where the auditorium and the temple are, and they were going over that knolls, going I guess westward, but anyway, they were heading over that knoll, and they were all in a line 15 feet apart. Well, anyway, what happened was the chief told me, he says, see, Jesus appeared to them. Listen to this. Jesus appeared to them and told them, lay your weapons down and fight no more. This is actual something that happened in 2000. And lay your weapons down and fight no more. Well, they did. They dug a pit. They buried their implements of war right there on the grounds, and then they covered them over with rocks. And every time the Indians waste with either a pile of sticks, you bring a stick and just keep that up. They would gather stones every time they passed that pass. They go through there, and for a monument. Well, they built a monument because Jesus appeared to them. Now these weren't church-going people for our church, but they witness of Jesus appearing to them. So I'm looking at it in a different light than just happenings. It's a spiritual thing that happens, and the spiritual thing, yes, those people probably are descendants of those things, and so I think there's so much of the spiritual side that we don't understand very much, but we need to open that word up and the Bible as well at the same time and see how it harmonizes. It's wonderful that the Lord knows that, and he knew those people before. And this day, the chief is telling me, we talked to Jesus. And he said, I am Jesus. And I say, wow, that is amazing. So there's other things going on around that area where the spiritual aspect of being believers of God, of Jesus. And yes, I believe they saw Jesus.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Phil.
I thank you very much. I strongly believe that Jesus walked the Americas. Other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, which he said over and over again. So I suspect, even though we haven't found the records, I suspect he walked every continent.
And Phil, let me remind you that we had a presentation from Rainbow Eagle who highlighted that this area of independence that has the temple on it was identified with a great medicine wheel at least 2,000 years ago. And that evidence that is part of the tradition that this is a place where people could come and lay down their arms and be negotiate peaceful settlements made it a pivotal place for the continent, for the world of the First Nations people. And then for Joseph Smith to identify that same location as the center place, and to encourage the Book of Mormon to be presented from here. And then for Harry Truman to announce from the steps of the auditorium that the United States would be part of the United Nations, and thereby be an advocate for peace among all peoples of the world. That again picks up on that same Helaman statement from chapter 5 that I read earlier, that the peace is to be the promised land for all people. And that message from Jesus is so profoundly offered in the Book of Mormon. And it is, I think, our duty and responsibility to keep moving people in that direction. I'm pleased right now to be sponsoring the Peace Perspectives Forum out of the Joseph Smith III home, and inviting people internationally to look at perspectives, look at aspects, and let's see if we can't move that or use that taproot that takes us back into the origins of our history, and give it birth, give it nourishment, give it a chance to have a future. So that future is the one that
we will wage war until they sue for peace. Right.
All right. Well, discussion, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your participation. I don't want to shut things off prematurely, but it does happen that we're getting close to 10 o'clock, and I have a trip to Iowa to make before 10 o'clock in the morning. Praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King of creation. O my soul, praise him, for he is thy help and salvation. Come all who hear, now to his temple draw near. Join me in glad adoration. Praise to the Lord, oh let all that is in me adore him. All that hath life and breath come now with praises before him. Let the Amen sound from his people again. Gladly forever adore him. Good night.
Is
Good night.
spotlighting a distraction or a help?
Was that?
I like it. I to be able to highlight who is speaking, I think is helpful. But I'm open to what other people have to say.